Hello and welcome to the Providence College Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Kay, and I'm joined by producer Chris Judge of the class of 2005. Here on the Providence College Podcast, we bring you interesting stories from the Fryer family. This week, we're talking with John Smith, a member of the class of 2013. Smith, who majored in social science and minored in film at PC, is celebrating the premiere of his latest documentary film, Hi Neighbor, the story of the Narragansett Brewing Company on Rhode Island PBS. The film details the incredible comeback of an iconic Rhode Island brand, which is at one point New England's largest brewery. John, thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So how did this project get started?
Well, the inspiration came about right after my grandfather died. My grandfather was an employee of the brewery for most of his working life. And he passed away about a decade ago. And that was right about the time when I think a lot of people start to take, when I was of the age when you start to take an interest in family history. And so he passed away and I kind of lost that connection to the past, that the opportunity to ask him what it was like. So, and that was also about the time that Narragansett, in its new form, as we know it now, was beginning to become popular again in the state and in the region. So I decided just to do some research to see if I could find some answers on my own about my grandfather and what it was like for him to work at the brewery. And as I did more research, I realized that there was really a story there, and it went beyond just a somewhat iconic brewing company with a catchy slogan to a really human story about determination and grit and failure and triumph. And that my grandfather was a part of that in some way. And so that got me thinking that, how many other folks are in my position around my age who have lost a connection to the past, who are looking for answers. And that's when I realized that there was a story to tell. And so I pitched the idea to our director of production and our president, and they loved it, and they supported me and trusted me to tell the story.
So can you tell us a little bit about the process behind the project? How long have you been working on it?
It was about 3 years, and it's a little bit longer. That's a little bit longer for a 1 hour doc, but COVID really kind of put the brakes on the production process. And so we really had a lot of momentum going into the winter of 2020, and then COVID happened. So we had to kind of stop and we had to get creative with completing the documentary. But it really started with just doing the research, beginning to assemble the players that I knew who would possibly provide answers, and then talking to them, interviewing them, and seeing if they had connections, if they knew folks that I could speak to. So it just sort of sprouted from the ground and began to grow. And before I knew it, I had this great network of people and resources who I could speak to. And
how much would you say you knew about the Gansett Brewery history before you got started?
I knew very little. I would say that I knew what I referred to throughout production as the hits. So the things that kind of everyone remembered or knew about, whether you were alive during the Gansett glory days of the 50s and 60s, or whether you're younger like me and you're just, aware of the brewery in its new form. Things like its iconic scene in Jaws where Captain Quint crushes the can, or Kurt Gowdy, who was a sportscaster for the Red Sox, who really made that tagline famous, "Hi Neighbor, have a Gansett." And, all those famous commercials and jingles from the 50s and 60s. So it was after doing that kind of research, I realized that there was much more to it than just those iconic things that we all sort of knew. And the story began to develop, and it became very much about the human element. Because I had the opportunity to speak with former employees who were there, who experienced what it was like to actually be there on a day-to-day basis. And that really humanized the story.
I'm curious what surprising elements of the brewery's history you might have uncovered in your research.
Well, it was fascinating to learn how they survived Prohibition. They really gained a lot of momentum leading up to Prohibition, and then they had to get creative. And like a lot of breweries at the time, they found ways to make some kind of money, whether they were producing sodas or ice. Narragansett Brewery, actually, they were a big producer of ice because this was before the time when people where it was common to have your own refrigerator. So you buy ice from someone who drive by in a wagon, and they, chip off a huge chunk of ice that you put in an insulated box. And then a very fascinating story that I learned is that the advertising manager for Narragansett, his name was Jack Haley, and he was the man who created all those hits that we look back on for marketing, such as Hi Neighbor Have a Gansett. He was actually involved in some way in the creation of what we know today as the Jimmy Fund. He was very close with a lot of executives for the Boston Braves and the Red Sox. And he was very inspired by the original broadcast with the original Jimmy. And he played a part in making sure that the appeal continued on. And I was able to speak to his daughter, and she's interviewed in the documentary. She discussed with me how that was one of the most proudest accomplishments of his life, and how he was so proud to have been a part of that in some way.
This wasn't your first PBS documentary. Can you tell us a little bit about your first project, Revisiting Smith Hill?
Sure. So when I was a senior at PC, I began working on a senior project for the film minor, which explored restoring old houses and using them as affordable housing in the neighborhood of Smith Hill. And my father was the executive director of the Smith Hill CDC at the time. So it was a great way to connect with him, learn about what he does, but also learn about the important work that community development corporations do. And that project grew from my senior year into when I continued on, as I got my MBA at PC as well. So I continued working on that through the course of my MBA. It was just a very interesting way to connect with my father, learn about the important work of community development corporations, but also learn about the community that PC is a part of. So that film actually aired on Rhode Island PBS. And that was my first kind of introduction into broadcast with PBS.
You also grew up in the Smith Hill community. What was it like for you to come and enroll at Providence College after having been a neighbor of the college for so long?
It was interesting. Junior year, senior year of high school, was really thinking that I would be somewhere else, further away from home. And as fate would have it, I decided that PC was the right fit for me. And it was interesting. At the same time, I went to high school with my then girlfriend, and she decided to go to PC as well. And the decisions that we both made were not connected with each other. It was just totally independent. And we both decided independently that we would go to PC. So it was different in many ways, because growing up in the Elmhurst neighborhood, I was always on PC's campus in one way or another. So to have gone from being a younger kid to being a student was a unique perspective, but one that I really enjoyed.
And now, in addition to working as a producer at Rhode Island PBS, you're also an adjunct professor in PC's Department of Theater, Dance, and Film. What classes have you been teaching, and what's it like to return to PC now as a faculty member?
I had the wonderful opportunity to take over for Father Gumbert during his sabbatical this past academic year, to teach intro to video production in the fall, and then advanced video production this past spring. That was a really unique experience to be on the other side of the podium, I guess you would say. It was a very surreal experience, because those were the courses that really introduced me to this world that I now work in, learning the basics of camera operation, of lighting, of editing, of script writing. And I was really grateful, because I was able to pass on my experiences in the world of broadcast and content creation with the current students. And it was wonderful. It was challenging, because it was certainly, I think as a student, you think it's much harder to be the student, but then having the perspective of being the instructor, I can say that I think it in many ways can be a lot harder. And I now have that appreciation for all of my professors when I was an undergrad and grad there, just how much work they have to do to be prepared, to be the best instructor that they can be, to make sure that they're giving you the best quality education.
That makes a lot of sense. But sometimes you've got to live it to understand it, right? You've got to walk in the shoes.
Absolutely.
So, John, you're an alum working in the field that you were training in at PC. And you've already alluded to this a bit, but I'm curious what classes or experience you feel that you had at PC are helping you in your career now. So you've already talked a little bit about intro to film studies, but if there are others that other experiences that helped you along the way.
Sure. I think in general, the liberal arts education that I got at PC was really critical to helping shape me as a producer, because as a producer, you're really a project manager in just a very specific field. And you have to be someone who can think critically and kind of look at all the angles and be able to understand all the angles. And what the liberal arts education gave me was that ability to do that and to do that well. And I'm not certain that I would have the same success that I have now without that experience. And then when I continued on and got my MBA, having that business background has also helped me tremendously, because I was able to couple the critical thinking component of the liberal arts education to the more application-based knowledge that I gained in the MBA program. Because a lot of what I do too involves public speaking. It involves budgeting. It involves understanding the costs of production, timing. So it's really been a great combination of an education for me that I've been able to use every day here at PBS in the production world.
The college is celebrating this year its 50th anniversary of enrolling women as undergrads. In honor of that anniversary, I wonder if there are any Friar women, faculty, staff, students, or alumni who particularly stood out as role models for you.
Yes. When I was an undergrad, before I had committed to the social science major, I was briefly a history major. And I took a historical research class with Professor Rousseau. And it was a very tedious class because it was all about understanding how to properly research and source material and identify material. But I always look back to that class because it really helped me to understand how you have to be very aggressive with how you're researching to make sure that you're getting the right content and that you're sourcing the right materials and citing the right materials properly. I still have one of the books that I had in that class that I will often use sometimes to make sure that I'm approaching it properly. And I really am grateful for Professor Rousseau's dedication to that class. I also had her in one of my Civ classes, and she was just a real great energy in the classroom. And it really helped me to enjoy Civ.
So, John, tell us a little bit about how you're still involved with some of the student organizations that you were involved with as a student yourself.
Yeah, for the past few years, I've had the wonderful opportunity to be able to come back and serve as an advisor to the student radio station WDOM and the student television station PCTV. And as an undergrad, I was on the executive board for PCTV, and it's a really great opportunity to come back and share some knowledge and just be a resource to the current team there. And they've done a tremendous job of growing as we move into a world that looks to be much more digital and much more accessible in mobile applications. Both DOM and PCTV have really grown and to move into that digital world. So it's a great experience for those students. And I'm really just very grateful to have the opportunity to be there for them in whatever way that I can.
Well, it's so interesting how much the world has shifted to video in general in so many different fields. So if the opportunity to get to think about it critically, even in the club setting, even for students who aren't, pursuing a film minor, it's got to be valuable.
Absolutely.
So, John, what's next for you at PBS?
It's sort of unknown at this point in time. I'm going to recuperate from finishing this project. And I can't speak specifically to what our plans are moving forward, but as PBS as an entity nationally has recognized that there's been this huge fundamental shift in the way that viewers consume the content. People want to see shorter content. They want to see content that's accessible on their phone in a digital package rather than the traditional broadcast, which is what has been PBS's bread and butter for so long. So it's exciting that we're aware of that, and we've been developing some really interesting ideas. And I'm looking forward to the next year where we're going to start to implement those new programs and new forms of giving the viewers ways to consume content.
So finding ways to help people who may not be able to make a broadcast time at a specific time on a specific day, but watch it when they want to watch it.
Just creating more options and opportunities for folks to consume our content, and also appeal to a younger audience as well, who does not consume content over a broadcast. It's all on their phone, all on their tablet, all on their computer when they want to, on their time. And it's important to be aware of that. And that's the direction that we're moving in. And I'm glad that we're aware of that. And I'm looking forward to all this new content that we're going to be producing.
Well, John, it's been wonderful chatting with you today. I'm going to try that again. John, it's been wonderful chatting with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
In case people want to catch the documentary, where can they watch it?
They can watch it if they're in our broadcast area in Southern New England. It'll be broadcasted on several different dates, continuing on through end of May and into June. They can find that information at RIPBS.org. If you're outside the broadcast area, you'll be able to watch it on demand after June 10th. And you can also find that information at RIPBS.org as well.
And we'll share that information with the show notes for any of our listeners. Thank you so much again. Subscribe to the Providence College Podcast in all the usual places, including iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify, as well as your smart speaker. If you like what you hear, please review and share with others. Thanks for listening, and go Friars.